The evening air was warm when Daniel stepped off the bus and walked toward the hotel with his small suitcase rolling behind him. He had been traveling all day, and all he wanted now was a quiet room, a soft bed, and a chance to rest before his big day tomorrow. He had worked hard to get where he was. He was young, bright, and determined to make his mother proud. This trip was special. He had been invited to speak at a small conference in the city. It wasn't a huge event, but for him it was a chance to show what he was capable of. The hotel stood tall on the corner, with golden lights shining through its glass doors. People were walking in and out, some laughing, some dragging their luggage after long flights. Daniel straightened his shirt, checked his phone for the reservation number, and took a deep breath. He felt nervous but also proud. He had paid for this room with his own money, earned from weeks of extra work. His mother had reminded him before he left, "Hold your head high, son. You've earned everything you're doing." Inside the lobby, the air smelled of fresh flowers and polished wood. The marble floor reflected the lights above, and soft music played in the background. Daniel looked around, noticing a few families checking in, a couple at the corner asking for directions, and a worker pushing a cart with clean towels. He walked up to the front desk with a polite smile. The manager, a man in a suit, stood behind the counter typing on his computer. "Good evening," Daniel said kindly. "I have a reservation. My name is Daniel Carter." The manager barely looked up. He glanced at Daniel, then at the suitcase, and then back at the screen. His eyes narrowed in a way that made Daniel suddenly uncomfortable. Instead of the warm welcome most hotels gave, there was a cold pause. "Reservation?" the manager asked, his tone sharp. "Yes," Daniel replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He pulled out his phone and showed the confirmation email. "I booked it last week. A single room for 2 nights. The manager leaned forward, looked at the phone screen, then leaned back slowly, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't think this is the right hotel for you," the manager said flatly. Daniel blinked, confused. "I'm sorry? This is the address on my booking confirmation. I paid for it already." The man gave a short, cold laugh, shaking his head. "I don't think so. Maybe you should try somewhere else." The words cut deep. Daniel felt his face grow hot. He had never experienced something like this before, at least not so openly. He looked around the lobby. No one else seemed to be told to leave. Couples, families, business travelers. They all came to the counter and were greeted with smiles. But here he was, being dismissed like he didn't belong. "I don't understand," Daniel said softly. "I have my ID, I have the booking. Is there a problem?" The manager's expression hardened. "The problem is you don't belong here. We don't want trouble, so I suggest you leave before I call security." Daniel's heart sank. His hands tightened around the handle of his suitcase. People nearby had started to glance in his direction, some whispering, some pretending not to notice. He felt a wave of shame, like the ground had opened under his feet. He had done nothing wrong. He had followed the rules, and yet here he was being treated like he was unwanted. He swallowed hard, his voice shaking. "Please, sir, I really do have a reservation. Could you at least check the system?" The manager leaned closer, lowering his voice, but his eyes carried a cruel edge. "I don't care what you say. You need to leave now." Daniel froze. His mind raced. Should he argue? Should he demand his right to stay? But the humiliation was too heavy, and the stares from strangers were unbearable. He felt like a spotlight was shining on him, exposing him in the worst way. Slowly, he stepped back, pulling his suitcase toward the door. His chest felt tight, and he bit his lip to keep from showing the tears that wanted to come. Outside, the night felt colder than before. He sat on a bench near the entrance, his suitcase at his feet, and took out his phone. His fingers trembled as he scrolled to his mother's number. He didn't want to worry her, but he couldn't hold it in. When she answered, her warm voice filled the silence around him. "Daniel, you made it to the hotel, right?" she asked gently. He took a shaky breath. "Mom, they won't let me in." "What do you mean?" Her tone changed quickly, turning sharp with concern. "The manager, he told me to leave. He wouldn't even check my booking. He just said I don't belong here." There was silence on the line for a moment. Daniel could imagine his mother's eyes narrowing, her mind already working. When she spoke again, her voice was calm but filled with strength. "Son, listen to me," she said. "You did nothing wrong. Don't you dare think for a second that this is your fault. Stay where you are." "I'm coming. Mom, you don't have to—" I said I'm coming. Her words left no room for doubt. Sit tight, Daniel. And remember, you belong anywhere you choose to be. Don't ever forget that. Daniel's eyes stung, but this time not from shame. A small sense of relief filled him. His mother had always been his rock, the one who taught him to walk tall no matter what. He sat quietly, watching the lights of the city, waiting for her arrival. Inside, the hotel looked warm and golden, but to him it felt cold and closed. He didn't know what his mother would do, but he trusted her. And for the first time since he had entered that lobby, he began to feel that maybe justice was still possible. The night stretched on as Daniel waited, his mind replaying the scene again and again. Each time the words cut deeper. You don't belong here. But soon, he told himself, someone who mattered far more than that manager would walk through those doors, someone who would show him that he was never alone. Daniel sat outside the hotel, his suitcase by his feet, staring at the glowing streetlights as cars passed by. Every minute felt longer than the last. People walked in and out of the hotel doors, some laughing, some on phone calls, others with children tugging at their hands. Nobody seemed to notice him anymore, but Daniel felt the sting of what had just happened. His chest still carried the weight of those words, "You don't belong here." He tried to brush it off, but the hurt clung to him like a shadow. He checked his phone again. His mother's message had come only minutes earlier. "I'm on my way." That short text carried enough strength to steady his shaking hands. He remembered her voice on the phone, calm but firm, promising she would handle this. His mother was not the kind of woman who let wrongs go unanswered. As he sat there, Daniel thought back to all the times she had stood up for him when he was younger. In school, when a teacher underestimated him, she was the one who walked into the office with grace but also with authority. When neighbors dismissed him, she reminded him of his worth. She always said, "Never let anyone make you feel small, Daniel. You carry yourself with dignity because you are my son, and that means something." Now more than ever, he needed her presence. He felt a mix of relief and guilt. Relief that she was coming. Guilt that she had to. He wished he could have stood stronger in that lobby, demanded respect, but the humiliation had been too much. Still, he knew that once she arrived, things would be different. His mother was not just any woman. The sound of a car pulling up made his heart skip. He looked up to see the familiar dark-colored sedan glide to the curb. The driver's door opened and out stepped his mother. Her posture was tall, her movements calm, her expression unreadable. She was dressed in a neat blazer, her hair perfectly done, and her eyes carried a quiet fire that Daniel knew well. She didn't need to raise her voice to command attention. Her very presence did that. "Mom," Daniel said softly, standing to greet her. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch steady and reassuring. "Are you all right, son?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I'm okay, just embarrassed." Her eyes softened as she looked at him. "There is no reason for you to feel embarrassed. You did nothing wrong. The shame does not belong to you. It belongs to the one who treated you unfairly." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He nodded again, drawing strength from her words. "Show me the confirmation," she said calmly. He opened his phone and handed it to her. She read the booking details carefully, her lips pressing into a firm line. After a moment, she returned the phone to him and glanced at the glowing hotel doors. "Stay here," she instructed. "I'll handle it." Daniel wanted to protest, but he knew better. His mother was not one to be stopped once she had made up her mind. So he stood quietly, watching her walk toward the entrance. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement as she moved with calm assurance. People naturally made space for her as she stepped inside. The lobby looked the same as before, polished, bright, and warm. But the atmosphere shifted the moment she entered. Guests noticed her presence and turned their heads. There was something about the way she carried herself that drew attention. She walked straight to the front desk where the manager still stood. He was speaking to another guest, smiling politely, but his smile faded when he saw her approach. "Good evening," she said in a clear, steady voice. The manager gave a half smile, trying to appear friendly. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I help you?" "My son had a reservation here tonight," she began, her tone calm but edged with weight. "His name is Daniel Carter. He showed you his confirmation, but you refused to honor it." The manager shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted left and right as though searching for an escape. "Oh, well, you see, I think there must have been some confusion." We're very busy and— She raised her hand slightly, silencing him without a word. The simple gesture carried authority. Her eyes locked on his, unwavering. Confusion? She repeated slowly. There was no confusion. My son was humiliated. He was told he does not belong here. Those were your words, weren't they? The manager stammered, his face growing pale. Guests nearby began to notice the tension. A few leaned closer, pretending to look at their phones while recording. The soft music in the background suddenly felt out of place. Well, perhaps he misunderstood me. The manager tried. No, she interrupted firmly, but still without raising her voice. My son does not misunderstand. He came with respect. He came with his booking, and you dismissed him in front of strangers without even checking the system. That was not a mistake. That was a choice. Her words hung in the air. The manager's throat worked as he tried to swallow. Beads of sweat appeared near his hairline. The power he had wielded so carelessly moments ago now slipped from his hands. He had no defense against the calm authority in front of him. Who exactly are you? He asked, his voice weaker now. She reached into her bag and took out a card, placing it on the counter. He picked it up and the color drained from his face. His hand shook slightly as he read the name and title printed in bold letters. She was a respected judge, known across the state for her fairness and strength. Her reputation was one that carried weight far beyond the walls of this hotel. The silence in the lobby deepened. The manager's jaw dropped slightly as realization hit him. This was not just a mother defending her son. This was a powerful figure, someone who could not be dismissed or ignored. Her voice remained steady. Now tell me, do you still believe my son does not belong here? The manager's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked around desperately as if hoping someone would save him, but no one stepped forward. Even the other employees behind the desk avoided his gaze, suddenly busying themselves with papers and screens. The mother leaned in slightly, her eyes never leaving his. You made him sit outside in shame after he had already paid for his stay. You tried to take away his dignity. That will not go unanswered. Daniel, watching from just outside the door, felt his chest swell with both relief and pride. He had seen his mother in many roles before, gentle, loving, encouraging, but this side of her was something else entirely. She was unshakable, standing tall in a place where he had been made to feel small. The manager cleared his throat, his voice trembling now. I can make things right. We do have a room available. I can upgrade him. It was a misunderstanding, but she did not let him finish. It was not a misunderstanding, she said quietly but firmly. It was disrespect, and I will see to it that the owner of this hotel hears about it. The crowd in the lobby was silent, waiting, almost holding their breath. The manager, once smug and dismissive, now stood frozen, the card still trembling in his hand. Daniel stood just outside the hotel's glass doors, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding inside. He could see his mother at the front desk, her posture straight, her expression firm but calm. She did not shout. She did not wave her hands like many people might when angry. She simply stood there with quiet authority. And that alone was enough to change the entire mood of the lobby. People who had been sitting in armchairs near the entrance lowered their voices, leaning forward to catch what was happening. A family waiting to check in stopped mid-conversation, their eyes drifting toward the front desk. Even the bellhop, who had been wheeling a cart stacked with luggage, paused at the edge of the hallway, pretending to adjust the bags while listening closely. Inside, the manager shifted uneasily, his once confident air replaced by nervous fidgeting. He held her business card in his hand as if it were a burning coal. He wanted to put it down, but he couldn't seem to let it go. The name on that card carried weight, and now he realized exactly who he was dealing with. The mother spoke again, her tone steady, each word measured. You see, when you dismissed my son, you didn't just dismiss a guest. You dismissed a human being with every right to be here. You told him he didn't belong, and you did it publicly. That choice carries consequences. The manager swallowed hard, his voice weak. I realize now I made a mistake. If you'll allow me, I can fix this. We have a suite available. I'll make sure your son is comfortable. But she did not move, did not soften. You think an upgrade erases the humiliation? You think offering him what he was already owed makes things right? Her words struck like iron. You cannot cover disrespect with luxury. The damage was done when you made a young man feel small for no reason other than your own prejudice. The lobby grew quieter still. The guests were no longer pretending not to watch. Phones were lifted discreetly, small red recording lights glowing. A murmur passed through the crowd. Some nodded as if agreeing with every word she spoke. Others simply looked at the manager with disgust, recognizing his shame. Daniel shifted on his feet, his heart racing. He felt both nervous and proud. Nervous because all eyes were on his mother. Proud because she stood there with such unshakable strength. He had never felt so defended, so valued. For once, the weight of humiliation he had carried outside seemed lighter. The manager's hands trembled slightly as he placed the card back on the counter. I meant no harm, he muttered, though the words sounded hollow. His mother leaned in slightly, lowering her voice but making it sharp enough for those nearby to hear. You meant no harm, and yet you refused to even look at his booking. You meant no harm, and yet you forced him to leave in front of strangers. Harm is not only in actions shouted with anger. Harm is also in the quiet cruelty of treating someone as less. The words pierced through the silence. The manager's face flushed red. He tugged at his tie as if it had suddenly grown too tight. His lips parted, but he couldn't find a reply. She straightened again, her presence towering over the space. Tell me, she said, her eyes locked on him. Would you have treated another guest the same way? A young man who looked different? A young man who carried a different last name? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The manager's mouth opened, then closed. He looked to the side, then down at the counter, unable to answer. His silence was louder than any denial he could have given. A woman sitting near the fireplace whispered to her husband, She's right. Another guest, a man with a briefcase, shook his head and muttered, Unbelievable. The crowd's judgment pressed down on the manager like a heavy weight. The mother finally turned slightly, gesturing toward the glass doors where Daniel stood. That is my son, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the lobby. He walked in here with respect, with his booking in hand, ready to rest after a long day. And instead of being treated like any other paying guest, he was told to leave. He was told he did not belong. Dozens of eyes turned toward Daniel. For a moment, he felt the heat of the attention. His chest tightened and he wanted to shrink back. But then his mother's gaze met his and her eyes were filled with pride, not pity. Slowly, Daniel straightened his shoulders and stepped closer, finally pushing the doors open and walking into the lobby. His steps were small, but each one carried more strength than the last. The guests watched as he approached his mother's side. She placed a hand on his arm, steady and warm, as if anchoring him in that sea of strangers. Together, they stood facing the manager. The contrast between the trembling man behind the counter and the calm mother and son before him could not have been clearer. The manager cleared his throat again, his words stumbling. Mr. Carter, I apologize. You are, of course, welcome here. I will personally see that your room is ready. Daniel's mother tilted her head, her expression unreadable. You apologize now because you've been exposed. But where was that apology when he stood here alone? The manager's eyes darted around, searching desperately for support, but none came. Even his own staff avoided his gaze, unwilling to stand by him. One of the younger employees, a woman in a neat uniform, stepped forward timidly. Her voice was soft, but it carried honesty. He did have a reservation, she said, looking at the computer screen. I saw it earlier. He was booked and confirmed. The lobby gasped softly. The truth had been spoken. There was no room left for excuses. The manager froze, his face drained of color. His lie, or at least his willful ignorance, had been exposed not just by the mother, but now by his own staff. Daniel's mother nodded slightly, her voice calm. Thank you for your honesty. She turned back to the manager, her tone colder now. It seems the only confusion here was in your own heart. You chose not to see what was in front of you because of your own bias. The manager's legs seemed to weaken. He leaned against the counter for support. The authority he once used to dismiss Daniel had evaporated completely. He was no longer in control. Daniel stood quietly, his heart pounding. For the first time that night, he felt the balance shift. The shame he had carried was no longer his. It was now squarely on the shoulders of the man who had tried to belittle him. And everyone in the lobby knew it. The mother did not shout, did not demand revenge. She simply allowed the truth to stand in the open, visible to all. That was enough. The manager froze, his face etched with regret and fear, while the crowd looked on in silence. Daniel glanced at his mother again, his eyes shining with admiration. He thought of how easily she could turn silence into power, how her calm voice could shake the walls more than any anger ever could. And in that moment he realized something he would never forget. Dignity was the strongest weapon of all. The lobby air felt heavy, almost as if everyone was holding their breath. Daniel stood tall beside his mother, though his heart still beat fast inside his chest. He had never been in such a moment before, where all eyes turned toward him, where silence filled the room, and where justice seemed to be unfolding in front of strangers. The manager's face was pale, his hands twitching nervously against the counter. His earlier confidence had melted away, leaving behind only panic. He glanced at the computer screen, then at the people watching, then back at Daniel's mother. His words stumbled, his voice dry. This is all a misunderstanding. I assure you there was no ill intent, but his excuse fell flat. The young staff member who had spoken earlier looked uncomfortable, but she stood firm near the side of the desk. Guests whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads. A man with a suitcase muttered under his breath, "Misunderstanding?" We all heard what he said. Daniel's mother did not move closer, yet her presence pressed against the manager like a storm he could not escape. You call it a misunderstanding, she said, her voice calm and steady. But everyone here knows what it was. My son stood here and you dismissed him without cause. Even when he showed you proof of his booking, you refused to check. That was not confusion, that was a choice. And choices have consequences. The murmurs in the lobby grew louder. Some people took out their phones openly now, recording the scene without hesitation. The glow of their screens lit the room in small patches. The manager noticed and panicked even more. His voice cracked. Please, there's no need to involve anyone else. I can fix this right now. Let me bring the key myself, but she didn't budge. Fixing it now does not erase what you did, she said. You made my son feel unwelcome. You made him sit outside in the night after paying for a place he was promised. Do you think that can be undone so quickly? Daniel swallowed hard. He watched the manager's shoulders slump, and for the first time he realized the man was truly afraid. Not just of losing his job, but of being exposed. The crowd around them was no longer silent witnesses. They were judges of their own, watching his every move. Finally, the mother turned slightly toward the young staff member. May I ask, she said gently, could you check the system once more for my son's booking? The employee nodded quickly and tapped on the computer keyboard. Within seconds, she looked up. Yes, ma'am, she said softly. His room was reserved. Paid in full. Everything is confirmed, the words echoed across the lobby. Daniel's chest tightened, a mixture of relief and anger flooding him. He had known it all along, but hearing it aloud in front of everyone changed everything. He had been right, and the truth now stood unshakable. Gasps and whispers spread across the room. A woman in a red coat said loudly, He had the booking all along. Another man folded his arms, glaring at the manager. Disgraceful, he muttered. The manager's face burned red, his hands fumbling. I don't know how I missed that, he stammered. It must have been an error. No, the mother said firmly, her eyes never leaving him. You didn't miss it. You refused to see it. That is very different, the crowd murmured again, agreeing. The manager shrank behind the counter as if hoping the ground would open and swallow him whole. He could feel his power slipping away with every passing second. Just then another figure appeared from the back hallway, a man in a gray suit, older with silver hair and a calm face. His eyes scanned the room quickly, taking in the tense silence, the phones recording, the nervous staff, and finally the manager's trembling form. He stepped forward with authority. What is happening here? He asked. His voice was low, but it carried through the lobby. The staff straightened instantly. The manager froze. Sir Mr. Hayes, I was just... But the older man raised a hand, silencing him. He turned toward Daniel's mother, offering a respectful nod. I am the owner of this hotel. Please forgive whatever trouble has occurred. May I know what has happened? The manager shifted uncomfortably, but the mother spoke first. She told the story simply, without exaggeration. Every detail clear and calm. How her son had come with his booking. How the manager had refused to even check. How he told him to leave. And how he was forced to sit outside until she arrived. The lobby remained silent as she spoke, her words carrying more weight than any raised voice could have. When she finished, the owner's face was grave. He looked at the manager with disappointment so sharp it cut deeper than anger. Is this true? he asked. The manager stammered, There was confusion, I thought. It is true. The young staff member interrupted bravely, her voice clear. The booking was always there. He refused to check it. The owner's jaw tightened. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them with decision. Leave your badge on the counter, he said to the manager. Your service here is finished. The manager's eyes widened in shock. Sir, please, Enough, the owner said firmly. I will not allow this hotel to be a place where guests are treated with disrespect. You are done here. The words dropped like stones in the silence. Gasps filled the air, followed by murmurs of approval. The manager's face crumpled. He slowly reached up, unpinned his name badge, and set it on the counter with trembling fingers. His once proud stance was gone, replaced by a broken figure. Without another word, he turned and walked quickly toward the back hallway, his head lowered. The lobby erupted with soft applause. It wasn't loud, but it was real, clapping from strangers who had witnessed justice. Some nodded at Daniel and his mother with quiet respect. Others whispered to each other about how right it was that the truth had been seen. The owner turned back to Daniel's mother. His voice softened. I deeply apologize for what you and your son have experienced tonight. It should never have happened. Please allow me to personally welcome him. He gestured kindly toward Daniel. Young man, your room is ready. And not just the room you booked. Please accept our best suite at no extra charge. It is the least we can do. Daniel hesitated, looking at his mother. She nodded slightly, as if to say it was all right. But even as he accepted, he knew this moment wasn't about the suite or the luxury. It was about something bigger, the truth being seen, the wrong being made right, and the dignity of standing tall after being pushed down. The owner then addressed the lobby, his voice carrying authority. To all our guests, please know this does not reflect our values. Every person is welcome here, and every person deserves respect. Tonight, we have learned a hard lesson, and it will not be forgotten. The guests nodded, some clapping again, others murmuring approval. The atmosphere, once heavy with tension, now shifted toward relief and quiet admiration. Daniel stood close to his mother, his eyes full of gratitude. He whispered softly, Thank you, Mom. She smiled gently, brushing his arm with her hand. Never thank me for standing up for you, son. That is my duty and my honor. What matters is that you remember. No one can take away your dignity unless you let them. And you did not let him. Her words sank deep into Daniel's heart. For the first time that night, he felt proud not just of her strength, but of his own endurance. He had endured humiliation, yes, but he had also stood through it, waiting, trusting, and now he was standing in the light of truth. The crowd slowly dispersed, but many cast lingering glances at Daniel and his mother, their faces carrying respect. Some even offered small nods of encouragement. Strangers who had witnessed everything would now carry the story with them, telling it to others as an example of dignity and justice. As the owner personally escorted Daniel and his mother toward the elevator, the young man glanced back once. The desk was empty now, the badge still lying on the counter where the manager had left it. To Daniel, it felt like a symbol, that arrogance had no place where truth stood tall. The elevator doors closed softly, leaving behind the whispers of the lobby. Daniel leaned against the wall of the lift, his suitcase beside him, and let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. His mother stood beside him, calm as ever, her eyes focused ahead. She didn't look tired, though the night had stretched long. She carried herself as though she had just stepped into a courtroom, calm, steady, and unshaken. Daniel looked at her in awe. Mom, he whispered, his voice low, how do you do that? How do you stay so calm when people are watching, when they're judging? She glanced at him, a gentle smile touching her lips. Because I know who I am, Daniel. And I know who you are. When you carry truth, you don't need to shout. You just let it shine. People see it, even if they don't admit it right away. The words settled deep inside him. He nodded slowly, his chest swelling with both pride and gratitude. He wished he could always have her strength, her calm fire that lit up a room without ever burning out. The elevator dinged softly, and the doors opened to the top floor. The owner of the hotel, walking just ahead of them, led the way down a quiet hallway. Plush carpets cushioned their steps, and the walls glowed with soft lights. At the end of the hall, he stopped in front of a large door. This is our best suite, the owner said kindly. I hope this will make up in some small way for what happened tonight. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, stepping aside to let them in. Daniel's eyes widened as he entered. The suite was beautiful, larger than any place he had ever stayed. There was a living area with a couch and armchairs, tall windows that showed the sparkling city below, and a bedroom with crisp white sheets that looked like clouds. On the table stood a basket filled with fruit, bottled water, and small chocolates. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, almost overwhelmed. He turned to thank the owner, but his mother spoke first. "We appreciate your effort," she said warmly. "But understand this, comfort does not erase disrespect. What matters is not the luxury of this room, but the dignity of every guest who walks through your doors." The owner bowed his head respectfully. "You are right. I will remember tonight, and I will ensure my staff remembers it too. This hotel will be better because of it." With that, he excused himself, leaving mother and son alone in the quiet of the suite. Daniel sank onto the edge of the bed, his body finally giving in to the weight of the day. His mother walked slowly to the window, looking out at the city lights. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Finally, Daniel broke it. "I felt so small, Mom," he said quietly. "When he told me I didn't belong, I believed him for a moment. I actually thought maybe I should just leave. I hated myself for not saying more." She turned from the window and came to sit beside him. Her hand rested gently on his shoulder. "Listen to me, Daniel. That moment did not define you. Do you know what does? The fact that you walked away with dignity. The fact that you called me, not because you were weak, but because you trusted that together we are stronger. And the fact that tonight, the truth stood tall for everyone to see. That is what defines you." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He nodded slowly, her words washing over him like a balm to the wound he had been carrying since the lobby. "You did not fail," she continued softly. "He did. And the whole world saw it." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Her words sank deep, steadying him, lifting him. He opened them again, this time with clarity. "I guess I'll never forget this night," he admitted. "Good," she said firmly. "Don't forget it. Remember it. Let it remind you to never doubt your worth. Because the world will try, Daniel. People will try. But you stand tall always. That's the only way forward." He nodded again, this time with conviction. The night grew late. His mother arranged his things neatly on the desk, making sure his clothes were ready for the next morning. She had always been like that, preparing him not just for the moment but for what came after. When Daniel finally lay down on the soft bed, exhaustion wrapped around him. He closed his eyes, but the images of the night replayed in his mind. The cold dismissal, the painful walk outside, the sound of her heels clicking across the marble floor, the hush of the crowd, the trembling manager, and the applause when justice was done. In those images, one thing stood out above all: the strength of his mother. She had walked into a place where he had been made to feel powerless and turned it into a place where he was seen, heard, and valued. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the room in gold. Daniel woke to the sound of his mother's gentle knock on the door. "Up, son," she called. "Big day today." He sat up slowly, stretching, and realized something had shifted inside him. The shame he had felt the night before was gone. In its place was something new, confidence, quiet but strong. At breakfast, held in the hotel's elegant dining room, guests who had seen the scene in the lobby the night before gave him respectful nods. A woman leaned over as she passed and whispered, "Your mother is incredible." Daniel smiled, pride glowing in his chest. When they finally checked out later that day, the staff greeted them with politeness and respect, their tones careful, their gestures genuine. The memory of what had happened still lingered in the air, a silent reminder that some lessons are learned the hard way. As they walked out into the bright day, Daniel carried his suitcase with a steady hand. He felt taller, lighter, as though the weight of the night before had been replaced by something stronger. His mother walked beside him, her expression calm but proud. "Mom," he said softly as they walked, "thank you for everything." She looked at him with warmth in her eyes. "You don't need to thank me, Daniel. I only did what was right. But remember, someday you will stand for someone else the way I stood for you. That is how strength is passed on." He nodded, her words sinking into his heart. He knew she was right. Life was full of moments where dignity would be tested. And when that time came, he would remember this night. He would remember the crowd, the silence, the trembling man, and the way truth had finally spoken louder than arrogance. As the car pulled away from the hotel, Daniel looked out the window at the building one last time. To others, it was just a hotel, but to him, it had become the place where he learned one of life's greatest lessons. No matter what anyone said, no matter how they looked at him, he belonged. He always belonged. His mother's words echoed in his heart. Never let anyone make you feel small. You carry yourself with dignity because you are my son, and that means something. Daniel smiled softly, the city passing by outside. He was no longer just a young man on a trip. He was a young man who had faced humiliation, stood through it, and walked out stronger because of the truth and the love of his mother. And that was a story he would carry with him forever.